Jen, you are the first box. What do you got?
Okay, so I've just been going in two tracks. One is report forms online, revision to pull from the metadata file that comes from DocAssembly, and the other part is working on the Weaver. Right now, I've been trying to think about that a little bit in parallel to add the right metadata there, and to kind of work through some of the backlog of issues we have on the Weaver. So right now, that primarily has been thinking about the next steps instructions documents and letting people do some basic customization, making it easier for people to realize that we are generating a next steps document for them and letting them preview it before they finish the Weaver. Because that's something that I think none of my students have understood is happening until they're pretty far into their project. And I do want them to think about, what do you do before you get started? What do you do when you're all done? As they're automating the thing, it's important context to know the whole process. So that should probably be ready early next week. I'll probably merge some of those changes, finish a lot of it today. Report forms online, .org stuff is sometimes a little slow because it's all intertwined with this, like, what metadata are we going to present? And how we're going to gather, and it won't show any fruit until we've actually updated a bunch of interviews, which is just going to be a little the metadata in the right place.
Boy, is it going to be nice when it does.
Yeah. When it's done, it'll be great, and when we can do it in the Weaver from the beginning of the project, I think it will pay off. I think this is the right way to do it, so it'll be worth it.
There we go. That patience is a superpower, paying off. Deferred gratification. Caroline.
So this week, I'll let Michelle talk a little bit more about it, because I think we were trying to figure out in the view and download on your final screen, your attachment screen. With the interviews, we have this accordion, and Jeannie wanted not to see the title there again, because you're on you see the title, you're on the page. Basically, you see the final product as an HTML page. And so we would have the title up there, and it would say personal action plan. And then at the bottom, not have a title because you're already looking at that. And then just say, instead of view, because you are viewing it, say see PDF because you're looking at HTML screen, and download. So Michelle and I worked on that because I didn't really want to put it in every interview. And I think the other thing was, there's no, I can't remember what the word for this piece is, but there is no title in the module. There's the view button and there's the download button, but the title isn't in there. So anyway, we ended up writing our own module for Alaska. Well, Michelle wrote the module. And I put it into the organization, our custom organization branding package. But I think we sort of got almost to the end, and then we were thinking maybe there's a better way to do this. So that's one thing I'll ask Michelle to talk a little bit more about. And then the other thing is that Michelle and Jack and I started working on thinking a little bit more about the AL income tool. I don't know what you want to call it, repository. And how we want to think about asking about seasonal work. And there's another, so the two questions are seasonal work, how are we going to ask about that? And then also, if somebody has just started getting more work that's not a new job in the last 3 months, and Chris joined us as well, because in Vermont you have to ask for the annual income, and then you ask for your current monthly income, which is not necessarily a 1/12 of what you made in the last year. Yeah, that's right. Because you may have suddenly started getting more money or started getting less money. And so we're sort of thinking through that from a question point of view. And then Michelle's trying to get us to pay attention to asking it in ways that she can actually code. We kind of got off on a tangent, but I mean, you have to figure out what it is you want to ask before you can figure out how to code it, right? So that's where that was our big stuff for this week.
All right. Well, that segue then, and Michelle.
Okay, so I'm gonna kind of recap my understanding of what we did for each of those things. And just so I don't forget, other than that, I worked with Mia a little bit on some of her tests. I kind of worked on things that were in my site at the time. So I'm working on what's turning out to be a much more complicated change than I had anticipated, but we'll see how it goes. For allowing certain affordances in AleKiln. Okay, so, and Jonathan, I might have been able to discuss the decoding thing in a way with Jonathan that will actually bear fruit. So that we will actually know the variables on the page, their variable names and their encoded names, so that we can get them in elements as elements. So we'll see how thorough that turns out to be. But that would be great, especially for random input tests, to actually be able to give useful feedback to the developer about what happened. So, okay, so Caroline's the first item she brought up was a situation where she wanted a download table, which contains currently the title, a button that says view, and a button that says download. She didn't want the title, and she wanted the view button to say see PDF. The view button label, we could change very easily with the module. The title, we couldn't, because there wasn't an option to hand in she didn't want to do it, well, she didn't want to do it per interview. So that necessitated another module, though I think it would be enough if you could just hand in a keyword title. Or the other thing I wanted to try with you, Caroline, was setting the title of the document originally to something that was an empty string. And so we could see if that would work. But for now, we created a module that creates the table, but doesn't include the title, and makes use of the assembly line module for most of it. It just has extra functionality on top of that. But there's other things we can explore. But the other options we have wouldn't be module wide, they'd be per interview. That said, we are using the function per interview anyway, right? We are using this new function per interview anyway. And so if we just use the old functionality per interview, that might not be, that might be sufficient. It just depends where we put the load. And the reason to try and use our module, the assembly line module, is to try and avoid having to maintain a module in the future, which I think would be preferable. Okay, seasonal, other incomes. So the itemized job class can handle some stuff. We identified, I think, 2 other things so far that it should be able to handle. One is inconsistent seasonal work, which we discussed a bit about how those questions might be asked. And that includes putting in the ability to have per season and the ability to have per month income values. And we got to think about that. The other thing is possibly getting back the last N months of income. Because Chris mentioned that their form asks for the income of the last month. And
The current monthly income, that's what their form asks for, current monthly.
the current monthly income. Sure. This past month, right? So there, no, I think she said the income from their last month. I think she did say that, not their current average monthly income, but the actual income from last month.
It's not average. I think the words are current monthly income, but which is a little bit different from last month's income. Like the month you're in now, what's your income? But maybe
Like,
that's a semantic thing. I don't know.
Expected income. Is that what you're saying, Caroline?
Pardon?
We'll have
Like-
to ask Chris, I think.
Oh, we can look at the form in a minute, but that is it's different from what we've got right now. It's something extra than what we've got right now. So we have to figure out what it is. Yeah.
We're gonna have another meeting next Thursday, and I think the goal will be to kind of write up first what it is. If you were sitting down with a person with this kind of job, what are the types of things they'd say if you were going to ask them, what is your income? Or other questions from the form, or, just to ascertain their income in the way that is necessary. Then what I'll need is what the court needs. So we have like what the user says, what the court needs, and then we'll figure out how our class can fit into that. That's my plan right now. And I think I expressed that to other people too, so I hope I did. But I think those would be the main two steps we need. Other than that, I can't remember anything other than that, other than if, Quentin, you need a hand with CSS sometime, or just want to drop a wireframe like that I might be able to implement, that would work for me. Yeah. And I think that's it.
All right. Fun with finance. Bryce,
I was gonna say, is this Michelle and Caroline, for the finance questions, is this worth trying to like get testers, or not? I guess not as much testers, because we wouldn't really have a thing to be testing, but more of like actually sit down with like a user test subject and like be like, hey, we're gonna
An interview, you mean?
and yes, yeah,
Yeah.
because we
I
do
don't
have.
think we're ready. I don't think we're ready for that yet, because we're trying to figure out what we have in common in the different states. Because we're asked, so Maine doesn't ask for current monthly income. Alaska and Massachusetts don't. I mean, so is there how fine are these distinctions? How important are they? And I think we got to figure that out first, and then definitely with users, just in terms of questions. But I don't think we're ready. We definitely want users, but we're not ready yet, because we're not all on the same page in terms of what we need. So we're trying to figure out what we need first, and then how do we ask the questions? And then we were also, as Michelle's saying, everybody was going to go back to their advocates and ask them, how do they actually ask these questions? So maybe the form, there's a way to fill out the form that isn't, it's like, with the whole reason we're doing these interviews is because forms aren't straightforward. So what are you actually putting as an advocate when you're helping somebody fill out the form? What are you actually putting in there? That kind of thing.
And how do people, how do the advocates ask the questions, and how do people answer the questions? What is it they understand about the questions?
Right.
Which I think Bryce is suggesting that maybe we sit in with some users, not just ask advocates.
Well, I think advocates are probably also a good way of doing it. I feel like they'd have more IRL experience than just users. And this is like peculiarly like not interesting, the privacy related thing, because I don't think you would get good results unless you were like, hey, we're going to ask you about your finances. We don't like really want to know the details, but we want to know how you think about it. And that's makes sense, but it's a hard sell, and it's something that is kind of it would be more difficult to ask someone about that than just a general like, oh, what do you like? Try and go through this interview as someone else, which is most of the time what we can sort of end up doing.
But
I think the advocate approach is good.
I mean, I think the thing is, the courts are asking for very specific information.
Yeah.
The advocates have a sense of what that is. It kind of doesn't matter what the users. We don't want to know what the users want to say. That's not until we know what it is we need from users. And that's where we are right now. So that's why you talk to the advocates. They're saying, what is this form actually asking for? If the user says, I'm giving them this, I don't care that that's what the user's giving them. Because what we care about is how to ask for it, which is a language thing. But before we get the language thing, we need to know what it is that the court actually wants.
That's fair. I do think I had misunderstood where y'all were, because you had been talking a lot about forming the questions, and I was like, okay, I don't think we want to start forming the questions until we have an idea of like the way I think about it is it's like, oh, what's the API that like the income library will actually have to put on the form, like essentially like,
right.
Oh, magical thing that holds all of the information from
Sure.
income information from the user. I want like exactly the last 3 months average or something like that, and figuring out that part first, which I guess that is where y'all are at. And I think I just messed with you.
Yeah, and that is also, I mean, I think that's why we're talking about the questions, because we're trying to figure out what it is. So, you and Quinton are talking about last 3 months pay stubs, last 6 months pay stubs. How do you ask this question? But what is it we're trying to get at? So, for example, that Vermont, the form says your current monthly income. So you talk to an advocate and you say, does that mean what you're making right now in this, like you're in the middle of May? So is that asking for May 1st to May 31st, or is it asking for, whatever it is, April 27th to May 25th, right? So what is it that we need to put in there? And until we know that, and that's why we're getting to, what are the questions we ask? Well, what are we actually, those are the questions. What information are we actually trying to get? That may be the way we ask it. So, so I think and I will say that some advocates that I've worked with feel like it's ambiguous enough that you ask the question and let the user figure out how they want to answer it, right? There's something on the affidavit of indigency on the first page. I can't remember what it is. Oh, I think it's household income. And the affidavit of indigency doesn't have specific instructions about who's the member of your household. So obviously, if it's your fee waiver and it's the court, if it's not a family law thing where you're trying to struggle over child support or divorce, you, as an advocate, you want anybody who needs the fee waiver to get the fee waiver, let them define what household income is, you see? So I think that's where we are right now on some of these pieces that go into the financial statement. Like, what is it we have to put in there? How clear do we have to be?
Yeah, I think
there's one part of like a user story that might be helpful, but maybe we could just kind of brainstorm, which is what kind of income situations do our users have that we have to accommodate whenever we know what the thing is that we need.
That's primarily what we talked about.
Yeah.
I think
I guess not necessarily need to talk to real users to do that, but I'm just curious. At one point we have to figure out, are we missing some cases, and understanding how much we can optimize for less common cases. You may not be able just to guess.
Right.
Yeah, these layers of ambiguity are ripe for a lot of times. I feel like they have intentionally been put into the workflow by all the different parties because no one can actually agree what something is.
Yeah.
So they all agree, thinking that their definition is the one that rules the day. And then, of course, they butt heads and they get in front of a judge. But
Well, I mean, the other part of this, the big part of it is that the AL income, what are we calling this? The AL income, what do you call it? Repository module set of questions, interview?
I've been calling it library.
Okay, library. Okay, so the AL interview income library. We across the country, I think there are two contexts in which you use it. One is for fee waivers, and the other is family law. In fee waivers, with my advocate non-court hat on, you want as many people to get a fee waiver as can. On the other side of that, it's in family law, you're talking about child support and divorce and divorce, really. And in that case, you want everything to be as transparent as possible so that it's fair. So I think those are, that's really up to the developer to sort of weed out. But I think from our perspective, we need to think about the context of why we're asking these questions and in what ways are we helping people, in what ways can we actually harm people if we don't help, particularly in the family law things, have things be
I think
transparent.
in all cases, what we want to do is we want to make sure that people are treated fairly and that they are representing what they are
Yeah,
required to, or so they can get what they're entitled to.
right.
The parties can get what they're entitled to, and that.
Mhm.
But yeah, I do think there is a question for the developer as to how they present some things. But I think that our role, it does feel like, is like the how do we,
Oops.
or Bryce's comment, the magic thing that stores all the stuff.
Right.
We do want to make sure we represent all the different ways that people are going to want to store and query those things.
I mean, the other thing, as a developer, in terms of discretion, what's so nice about what we can do is if a lawyer's filling this stuff out, a lawyer can always scribble something in the margin. And so we could do something like that. The form doesn't have it, but the form has white space. And, depending on, we could make bring up the possibility to a developer that there could be a field and it says, whether I expect my income to change in the next whatever. And that could account for this whole, and we have to think it through, but that might be a way to deal with these edge cases or the cases we haven't
We've
addressed.
talked before about how to replicate the white space on a form, the margins.
Mhm.
It's worth continuing to think about.
Anyway, yeah. So that we didn't come down hard on anything, except we have to think about this for next week.
Lots of thinking.
I do want to say that I think a lot of people, advocates included, when asking these kinds of professional questions of non-professionals, forget all the little things they say to prompt people to get them to an answer.
Mhm.
And they remember some of the main gist, but I don't think
So some of the what'd you say?
the main gist of
Oh.
how they ask stuff, but I don't think always remember how they actually get people there. So I just want to say there's that part of it too. Of course, like getting 80% of it, 90% of it is also definitely worthwhile. I'm just want to put that out there.
Well, when I was doing this, I'm working with this, we work with the people at the Family Law Center who are on the phone every day with people taking them through these questions. So, some of this is just rote. They just go through they brought up a lot of stuff when I was talking to them last summer. So, and that's the closest we can get. We're not going to come up with stuff that, if they don't tell us, we're not going to come up with stuff. I don't think,
I was going to say, at least for talking to advocates for like what they're trying to figure out, that's, I think, the one thing that the advocates would be really, really good at.
Yeah, exactly.
I agree, Michelle, they're not going to be like as good for how exactly to phrase the question, but if we're not, it's like Caroline said, I don't think we're at that point yet. Y'all are at that. It doesn't sound like y'all are at that point, and there's still a few things to work through before y'all get there. So.
And we always got to remember, compared to what? So if it's a blank non-talking form,
Yeah.
All right, well, cool. So I think, okay, so
That was me following up
that's
on.
good. Bryce, was there any more in there?
Don't worry, I got other ones. The only real update I have is I'm still e-filings progressing. I have made a bare amount of progress of like, I can get one call to ECF5 to work, and now I'm trying to wade through all of the complexity of getting both ECF5 and ECF4 runnable at the same time for different jurisdictions, because like, I don't think Tyler is switching every jurisdiction on at once. Like even, I think Texas was supposed to switch to ECF5 by like June 1st, and they pushed it back by like 6 months or something because it was kind of broken, and I had to do some hacky things to get it to work in the first place. But all to say, like, I don't think all the jurisdictions are going to switch at the same time, so I'm trying to make sure we can spin it up and just say, oh, okay, like Texas is going on to ECF5 now, like change one entry in a kind of config file and then restart the server and it will just work. But that's but that's just kind of a lot of architecting and refactoring code a lot. The one thing I was going to bring up, which isn't exactly a blocker per se, but probably is just worth a full conversation out loud, is the thing that Quentin had been working on. Is a very long discussion. Essentially, it was moving the when I made a change in the Weaver to move stuff from like the interview metadata block to just the metadata block. And the difference there was that the interview metadata block, we could support multiple like nested interviews. They could each have their own metadata and each only look at their own metadata and not have it be like overwritten with something else, which was a good idea to keep all the information around, but I don't think we ended up using it that much, except in the one case of the allowed courts. And Quentin and I had a longer discussion where I was trying to figure out, okay, like what are the rules for allowed courts for nested stuff, or like for nested interviews, like, oh, if you have one form that's can be filed everywhere, but you have another, like the parent form can only be filed in these specific courts, like what does it mean to combine all of those? Which was a very useful conversation. Thank you for that, Quentin. But the one thing I was going to ask, which I think you just made another comment right before this had started, which was essentially, do we actually, which you were questioning if we actually would use the allowed courts anywhere. It's all, sorry, Michelle, and that's all I can see. Yeah, sorry, I'll send, it's all in a GitHub issue. Or no, sorry, a comment on a PR that I will pull up and send to the chat now. If Quentin is in motion, then we can just put this off until Monday, and that works too. But okay,
Well, it'll be next week sometime, but we don't have Monday.
oh yeah, sorry, sometime next week. So we can just do that then. And it's I'll just sort of let that
Monday's a holiday.
Person who never takes vacation.
Yeah, so yeah, but whatever. It's honestly, it's like, I think it's a thing that was already merged, and I sort of just had a late review on it. But it was, I do think it was worthwhile to work out, and I've learned a lot from it, but I do think it's worthwhile to work out, okay, what are we actually going to use this stuff in the metadata for? And where does it go, and how does it work with all the nested interviews? So that's all I really have.
All right, cool. This is another one of those times where I realized that technically I'm only working on the assembly line 20% of my time, if that. So I don't have much to say, at least not for this video. Some stuff related, but all right. In that case, anything else anyone wants to record for posterity?